For this third movement of the Telemann Sonata, I have to explain how the rhythm works if and when you're using a metronome. So if you're using a metronome, you're not going to want to use a quarter note equals beat. If you have a click on, you're going to want it to be an eighth note click. So for me, I use eighth note equals 64. Obviously with solos it can vary back and forth. The main thing to understand is that the eighth note, when it's clicking, that is your beat. So basically you take every note and you double its value. So if you have this rhythm D, 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 you notice when I said D, D on the click, those were two eighth notes. So now if you had the quarter note, it would be D, 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 which is extremely slow. It's way too slow, and I wouldn't go as fast as 16th notes either. I think you should just stick with eighth notes. I think that works pretty well.